Okay, we are live and we got it. This is Senate Finance, and we are going to start taking a look at ways we might possibly finance a child care system. The bill was introduced today, but I've been told it does not have a funding source. It has some funding amounts out there. And I think you all got copies of an email from the RAND Corporation, answered some questions that came up. And I have a meeting, I believe, next week. We will have an hour break. Unless they want to show it to the whole committee, I don't know what it is. I just got told they wanted to meet next week via Zoom.
Really? Huh.
This RAND?
Yeah,
Interesting.
so I don't know if it's a follow-up or if they would like,
Oh, is this the stakeholders group?
I think it may be
Ah.
the stakeholders.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
it's a chance for you to ask questions and have them.
okay, so if anybody has questions,
The first one, what we're talking about today,
yes.
are we talking about where's the funding coming from based on the bill that's been introduced?
Yes,
And then what does the bill introduced require for funding, no?
Is there,
Well, yeah, the rough- with
I
the
think
presentation, we had different numbers. and
Joyce,
different-
do you know?
Right, so
Right,
it's,
so
oh, I'm,
Now, do we have enough?
No.
Yes, so the report has 5 different scenarios for providing subsidies to families. And the amount that needs to be raised depends on which of those scenarios might be adopted. But the funding gap, as they call it, varies from 179 million to 289 million. It's here.
So I remember from the.
And the Building Right Futures was significantly higher. It depends on how much you cover,
So that's the total cost.
Yeah.
yes, how many people you cover. There's several levers in there. I think our job might be to figure out possible amounts we might be able to reasonably fund, and then we can play with levers.
question, I'm new to this committee,
Yeah.
not to play the new guy card, but as we had the RAND report and now a bill was just introduced, I thought there's usually a JFO analysis. Does that usually always track with what the RAND, like what the previous report is, or are we anticipating a JFO analysis of the cost of this bill?
So for the record, I'm Joyce Manchester with the Joint Fiscal Office. And yes, we will do a fiscal note. That bill was under wraps for quite some time, and so we're just seeing it newly. But yes, we will fiscal note.
And I think usually when we ask for the outside, it's because it requires a lot more either people or expertise than we feel we can do in-house. So it was kicked out for an external study.
So follow up, not in a hurry, but what timeline, when do you think that JFO note would be coming around?
I don't know, we haven't talked about it in the office yet, but it's certainly Nolan Langwell and I have been working weekly with the RAND team to develop the report, so we are certainly familiar with what's going on. And until we have a specific funding source, we'll only be reporting this is the amount that will need to be raised, and it's up to you all to decide how to raise those funds. So it shouldn't be an especially hard fiscal note right at this point.
I'm trying to understand though, on the bill that's been introduced, is the bill for the full amount of the 270-some million, or what is the bill? I don't know what the bill does. is what I'm
I
saying.
actually don't know. We can blame Senator Bray and others, but I've been in testimony all day long today, so I haven't looked at the bill. I'm sorry. I can't answer those questions. Shall we start?
Yes, let's start.
So I'm going to share my screen. There we are. Are you seeing it? Okay, so my job is to talk to you about funding the early care and education, high quality, accessible system in Vermont. And I'm leaning heavily on the RAND report and on their presentation of the report. If you saw their presentation, you may recognize some of my figures and so forth. But they are the experts and we have learned a tremendous amount. It's a real pleasure to work with them. Okay, so I'm going to start off a bit slowly and talk to you about what it means. And right in the middle, okay, what it means to have a high quality, accessible early care and education system. Then I'm going to talk about the gap cost, those millions, hundreds of millions of dollars figures. And then I'll talk about the sources of revenue that can be used.
Skip one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So first off, RAND's job was to estimate the cost of providing that high quality, accessible early care and education system. And ECE I use as a shorthand way of saying early care and education. That seems to be the preferred term in the profession these days. And so I'll
Well, I know we've gotten between childcare and early education, or, yeah. And education, childcare has one kind of image and early education has another. And so this is probably a good way to bridge the gap.
Okay, now I went too far, but here I am. I'm now on slide 3. So this is elements of a high quality, accessible early care and education system. And I just want to remind you what the state of Vermont would get for its $645 million, which is the total cost of care estimate. So number one, an environment where young children thrive and learn. And of course, Vermont has started down that path already with its STARS rating system, and it's encouraging child care centers and family child care centers alike to reach for the stars and try to get up to that 4 or 5 star rating. So we are already moving in that direction. And in fact, all of these remaining points are similar to the 5 stars rating, except for the compensation package. Okay, so item number 2 under high quality, accessible early care and education is compensation for early care and education providers that is commensurate with their peers. And unfortunately, we are very far from that level at the moment. So in 2019, median earnings for child care workers was $28,500. Preschool teachers received $34,290. Kindergarten teachers in the public schools, median income was $56,000 plus benefits. Okay, so very few early care and education centers offer benefits. They can't do it with their budgets. Benefits are typically about 26% of wages. And so you get a huge gap between the amount of compensation for the.
And I assume that's a full-time position.
In the early care and education, yes, and absolutely, the public school teachers are generally 9 months or maybe 10 months.
But I'm, no, but it's not like somebody that works 3 hours a day. This is
Right.
full-time.
Correct.
Full-time.
Correct. Yes, so there is a big gap there in compensation, and that will take some money to fill. So then we have accessibility. So we want all eligible families to have access to public subsidies with more generous support. You may know currently that the CCFAP system, which is Vermont's state subsidies for families with children in early care and education, currently cannot reach all eligible families. There's not enough money. So it doesn't pay out at a very high rate, and you can't be guaranteed to receive that subsidy even if you are eligible and you want or need your child to.
So you have to get on a wait list for the money and a wait list for a slot in the childcare.
I'd say the harder part is the wait list for the slot. But
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yes, and finally, you want a system where public subsidies reimburse providers at the actual cost of care, not at the market cost of care. Right now, you will often hear the story that early childhood providers cannot charge more because their families cannot afford to pay more. And so they are pricing their product under the market, right? Under the actual cost, I shouldn't say under the market, but I mean under the actual cost of providing that care. So you would think that a serious public subsidy system would want to provide at the market, at the actual cost of care.
I just want to understand that better in terms of the actual cost. If they're below, if they're currently paid on the basis of the market cost of care, is it that the childcare providers who are providing the care are providing it at a loss?
So they are paying their workers based on what they're getting from families and the childcare system, but that is not a market rate, right? That is what they can afford to pay, and that is why they have such high turnover.
Rate, I would have thought would be what a willing worker is willing to take for doing that work.
They don't have enough willing workers, right? They have very many vacancies. They have high turnover. They have huge problems with staffing, especially now. Yeah, you'll hear from many families that their childcare providers are closing at 3:30. They're open only 4 days a week. You know, big.
They don't have enough people.
They don't have enough people because I can't.
There are
pay
industries
them.
all over Vermont that don't have enough people.
And there's huge demand for childcare
Yeah.
that can't be met, and the workforce is suffering because of it. Yeah.
That gets to be itself, you can't work if you don't have childcare, but your childcare person can't afford to support themselves, them and a family on the rate that they get paid, and families that are trying to work can't afford the present cost, never mind the cost of raising wages to a level where people would do the, I mean, you can go work in a fast food restaurant and make $24,000 a year. Right? And not have to have a college associate's degree, which the STARS program is now required.
Yes, absolutely. So here we are. So those are the goals of the high quality system that we would be paying for if we go with the full brand cost of care. Okay, so here's the $645 million in 2022 dollars. So this is for children in Vermont from birth until kindergarten entry. So it would be easier to say 0 to 4, but that's not quite right because some kids turn 5 before they actually enter kindergarten. So you should properly say from birth until kindergarten entry. And it reflects the value of the resources required to provide high quality service rather than relying on prices charged by providers. So some people will say, why do you need somebody with a college degree or an associate's degree to take care of a baby? And the answer is that the evidence says that the high quality system requires that bachelor's degree or associate's degree in order to provide the care that leads to the best child development. It's important for the providers to understand why they're doing certain things for very young children, and that will, enable that brain development to happen and so forth. That's so important in early years. So that's why we have these high quality standards. So the total cost is $645 million according to RAND. They then subtract the contribution made by families, and that contribution depends on which subsidy scale you want to choose for CCFAP, for the state subsidy program. If we look to start at scenario 2, which is closest to the status quo, we find that families are contributing about $260 million a year, or they would be contributing $260 million a year under scenario 2. The existing public funding is about $125 million, so that's both from the state of Vermont and from the federal government. The state of Vermont is currently providing universal pre-K. Remember, that's just 10 hours a week for 3 and 4-year-olds. They are paying for some part of CCFAP, and they are absorbing the cost, I guess, of childcare tax credits. So all of that counts towards state.
So last session, I believe we did, was it 33 or $50 million in state tax credits? Is that amount in that $125 million estimate?
I believe so, yes. Should
It's
be.
32 for the new child tax credit.
But that's already factored into the existing
be.
state contribution.
Yeah.
Okay, that I didn't know, but that is money that's,
Can I just clarify if it was a child care tax credit or a child tax credit?
I think both were expanded actually, but
Okay.
well, we expanded the match on the federal child and dependent care credit. And then we set in a new child tax credit, which was worth, I've been told, 32 million was the cost.
That's not.
that's not enough.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
good, that makes
Yeah, this
funding
is
a
just the
little
childcare.
easier. All right,
There's 32.
it's 32
Does
million.
that 32 million continuing revenue though, to pay for that tax credit?
Is in the base.
It was in, yeah, it was in the base. It wasn't one-time money.
Wasn't
No. No. We, remember, we fought that
Yeah.
and we wanted everything to sunset after 2 years or 4 years and we lost.
The question was, where's the money coming from? That-
Well, if the economy crashes, yeah. But right now, that is a tax credit. We'll know how much goes out, maybe in May, but when the credits get claimed. But the estimate was 32 million.
So the tough questions you wanted for Emily that I'd love certainty and clarity on as we try to cobble together the money for this. I just love confirmation that that 32 million that was in last year's budget as a child credit can be in fact used towards this.
Okay, so it is my belief that we are not including it now
In that estimate, but
in
it
this
could be.
estimate, but the question is, should it be included? Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
To the chair.
I mean, if, I've
Or
been
repurpose.
told that it's not figured in here, but that's a good thing to do, because then it is 32 plus or minus million that we have to add to the state contribution.
Right.
All things being equal and the economy not crashing. Remember, this is in fact an education program. So it will need some, if the economy crashes, to shut down daycares or limit, you're gonna need ongoing funding that's secure, because we found out in COVID, you start closing daycares because the state's short on funds, then people can't go to work, then things just continue in a downward spiral. So this should be, as with education, secure money, as secure as it is possible to make it in today's world. So we'd probably just add it to the property tax. I'm joking.
Okay, and let me just remind you that the 125 million includes both state and federal. The federal money is financing Head Start, and Early Head Start also offers some support for CCFAP. And of course, there's a federal child care tax credit of its own, yeah. All right, so we'll keep going. So the RAND report then estimates the finance gap that has to be funded. So here we're going to look at those 5 sliding scale subsidy schedules. And yes, here's the smaller gap that starts at 179 million to 193 million per year.
And see, I just find that difficult. I just find it difficult to understand
That where the number comes from, or,
what the graph is showing.
oh, is that right? Oh, okay, okay, we can talk through that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Especially when it gets to 5 scenarios or whatever that.
Oh, well, I started with 3.
No, I think it's good, but if you jump to that other one, I will lose.
somehow when we were doing tax credits, we did a different series Because we did it starts here, it goes to here, then it drops like that, and it was just
So-
easier to understand. This one throws me.
Okay, so part of the difficulty here is that the CCFAP schedules depend on where the family lies in terms of the federal poverty guidelines. And the federal poverty guidelines depend on the size of the family.
Okay.
So we can't just say, family income is blah, and this is where they are on the graph, because we have to translate everything back to a percentage of poverty level.
And we can't do
So
2
that's,
1/4 or 1 1/4.
that's right, that's right. That's right. So on the x-axis along the bottom there, you've got family income as a percentage of poverty, okay? And if you're a family up to 150% of the poverty guideline level, you don't pay anything. And so that red line starts at 0 until you get to 150.
And that's status quo. That's what's happening now.
That's status quo. I'm looking at the red line down at the bottom. Yep.
All right.
So, and under all of these schedules, no family up to 150% of FPG, as we call it, the federal poverty guidelines, would pay anything towards childcare.
And that's what, for a family of 3, is that something like $30,000 money?
So for a family of 3, it's 23,000.
23,000.
That's 100%.
That's 100%. Yes. Oh, sorry. And you're asking 150%. Yeah. So it's like 34, 35,000. Yeah.
34, so, yeah, not a lot of money.
Family of 3 meaning 1 adult, 2 kids.
So
or
it's
2
not
adults.
specified.
Yeah,
It's 3 people in the
3
household.
people, okay.
And in fact, CCFAP doesn't have a 2-person household. So if you're a 2-person household, you qualify under the poverty guideline for a 3-person household. All right?
so that leaves out all the single mothers or fathers with 1 kid.
No, it doesn't.
No, but
it
it gets them
includes
into
them.
the 3. Okay, so it actually benefits
Yes,
them.
absolutely.
All right,
Yes,
that's good.
yes. Okay, so
Are we moving, are you leaving?
No,
this
I'm
slide?
gonna
Oh, okay.
keep talking about this lovely
Okay.
picture. Okay, so as you move up the family income scale along the bottom line there, we're moving up the red curve. And that says that a family at 200% of federal poverty guideline would be paying a little over 6% of, is that right? Yeah, 6% of their income for childcare. Okay, and CCFAP is based on, you pay $25 a week if you're just over 150%. If you're over 175%, you pay $50 a week. And it keeps going up every 25 percentage points by $25. Okay, and then you can figure out how much of their income they would be paying. So
That's no matter how many children.
that's right, that's no matter how many, right. And so once we get to what, 250%? Is that right? Yeah, it looks like we're at 10% of income. And this is where scenario 2 diverges from the status quo. So the status quo is the green curve. It keeps going up because there's no cap. You just keep raising the $25 per week, goes to 50, 75, 100, 125, blah, blah, blah. And you keep going until you're over 10% of family income. So that's why that green line keeps going up.
Okay.
Okay, so you're over 10%. But Schedule 2 would say, let's cap it at 10%. That's what your bill said back in 2021. No family will pay more than 10% of their income for early care and education, up to 350%. So that's the dashed vertical line. That's the 350%
All right.
on family income, right? And the bill says they're not going to pay more than 10%. So that's the red line that goes straight across at 10% of income. And okay, and then Schedule 2 stops at 350% and says anything above that, if you earn $10 above 350% of federal poverty, then you're paying full freight. You're paying market rate, right? Subsidies stop, and you're paying full freight. So that's the jump up in the black line that keeps going up and up and up. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's see, and then Schedule 3 then just keeps that 10% cap all the way out to 500% of poverty. So that's why that line is horizontal. It stays right at 10% of family income, all the way up to 500% of poverty.
Now I have a question. Good. I don't know. This I don't understand, but I just think for us to be fiscally responsible, we need to work with JFO to go beyond the 500%. I mean, because I'm so confused what happens after that. Would you make a huge leap? How high does the curve go? What if there's a cost shift because childcare aren't getting enough money from whatever the subsidy is, so they have to charge more to families? What happens after that is the
Right,
question.
so currently, if the subsidy extends until 500%,
Yeah,
at that point, the subsidy stops and the family would jump up to that top curve line because they'd be paying full costs.
right. But then we have to know what happens to that curve line, because that could present like a healthcare like
Oh, absolutely.
shift, like what
I call that the benefit cliff, right? So
Yeah.
you're going along with your income that's
We have a
increasing.
child cliff right now.
We have plenty of benefits, right? Right, so you're going along and then your income increases $10 more and all of a sudden you have no subsidy. And so you're paying the full market rate. And this is gonna come up a little bit later, but Rand estimated the actual cost of care for infants,
Yep.
because the ratio is so small, you can only have 4 infants per adult in a room. The actual cost of care for infants is something like $36,000.
Right, at which point we should potentially be paying people to stay home, is how I feel. I did, I don't want
That is one of the
Yeah,
possibilities.
exactly.
You could
Exactly.
do.
right.
Okay, that's another testimony. I've run the numbers. It's probably not gonna work, but it's okay. I'll come back a different day and talk about that. Okay,
What's probably not gonna work.
paying people to stay home.
We'll give you an option, so no.
Right, yeah.
Okay, all right. So where are we now? So,
I guess, sorry.
Yeah.
Before we leave this curve, it's hard to tell if it plateau, like, in a normal
It should
scenario, if
plateau.
we don't change everything, does it plateau after 500, like, do we know when it plateaus?
yeah, so if there's a cost of care, which is $36,000, let's say, for infants, that's gonna become a smaller and smaller portion of a family's income
Right,
as their income rises.
but we're not gonna be asking families to pay for an infant versus a 4-year-old, are we? Are we gonna
Well-
say now you're paying, like, that has, usually childcares have shifted their finances
Cross-subsidized.
around. Yeah,
Right. So they cross-subsidize so that they have more or less a flat payment schedule, right? From infants to 4-year-olds, there's not that much difference, there is some difference. But they're cross-subsidizing, right? So the 4-year-old is paying more than the 4-year-old's actual cost of care.
right.
And the infant is paying much less than its
Which
actual.
is when we went to universal pre-K. And the 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds started to go to school because the schools were getting paid, so they took them off. It meant that the cost of paying for those infants did fall to parents at $36,000 a year. And that's what really started the present crisis, is places like some of my locals, and this is not a poor town, found that they couldn't ask people making 50,000 or 60,000 to pay 36 for childcare.
So I don't think the current price would be 36,000 because that assumes the full compensation.
Oh, the compensation, all right.
So it's gonna be
But it's
less,
still,
but it's a lot.
yeah, they had to have more staff and they couldn't subsidize the cost.
To Senator Ron Eastdale's point, my understanding of how this graph is presented, if you go this out to 600%, 700%, and so on, it's not gonna plateau. It should drop. It will
Right.
absolutely
Yeah.
drop. And then you can start asking the question, like 10 times the poverty level as a family making, or a unit of 3, making 200K a year. Do we wanna tax at the higher levels, those with kids to subsidize those with lower income. So I think it makes sense to model this out further beyond 500% to get a better scope of understanding of the families with kids.
Yeah, I'd at least like to see where it plateaus, like,
It's a good drop too.
and plateau and then drop it. I don't see that, but
It should turn around soon, like right away. Yeah, okay. So Nolan printed out the FPG levels, the federal poverty levels, so you can check out different
This to
and
me is always eye-opening.
absolutely.
You talk about 500%, but 67,950 is, well, that was last year. Now it's up to 72, and that's with inflation.
Right, and Rand was able to use American Community Survey data to say that about 60% of kids birth to kindergarten entry fall at the 350% or less. And about 81% of kids fall 500% or less. So you've only got 19% of kids above the 500%.
What is your earnings increase with age, and
Right.
even with the increasing age of people, of women giving birth, you tend to have children in your younger, probably less profitable years. So yeah, it would fall in to those areas.
Yes. Shall we move to the next? Are you
I
ready?
said, well, I feel like no matter what we do at 500%, after that, it would be nice to create a slope instead of a huge steep benefit cliff. So I'm just like, as long as we're all thinking about that, it would be a shame to see wherever it is that like a thick black line up to some huge amount that like.
But that benefits cliff is a problem now. It stops people from advancing.
Right.
Because if I make $10 more, I lose 500, or 5,000. That is a disincentive to advancing or improving your situation because it is so drastic.
Yeah.
So maybe one of our goals would be to see if we could, did they try?
They did not.
Okay.
They had very specific marching orders and they had very specific hours paid by contract. So they had their work cut out for them.
Okay. I did think that their contract was supposed to go to 800%. It was always 500%.
Every, I can look at that.
I'm not sure we specified 500%. They were absolutely on the hook for all the way up to 50%.
I think maybe the Building Bright Futures proposal went out to 800. And their estimated costs are significantly higher because they went much higher and were charging any kind of payment.
Legislation did not specify. cap.
I mean, at some point, for our purposes, it would be nice to see this further out
Sure.
to like beyond 500%.
No problem.
I mean, I can do math, but.
I'll make a nice chart. I'll bring a chart.
Okay, so now we can go to the more interesting figure, which has 5 lines on it.
Okay,
Well, but you already know the red, green, and the black.
okay, yeah.
So we have 2 more lines to talk about. The first is Schedule 4. And Schedule 4 just says, okay, no family is going to pay more than 10% by the time they get to 350%. They're going to ramp into that 10%. Okay, so they set what, 2%? What is that? 2% at 175% of poverty and 3% at 200%, 4%, and so forth. So they're just marching up the line there until you get to 350, and that's at, it should be at 10. I never understood why it stops at 9, but anyway. And then they keep going. Maybe they moved their ruler or something. But then they stop at right, 15% at 500% of the federal poverty guidelines. So that's that straight lighter blue line. It's just marching up, right? So that's setting the percentage of family income all the way up. And then Schedule 5 sets the 350% max at 7% of family income rather than the 10%. So that's a little more generous towards families. Now, of course, you have to realize that what's not being paid by families would have to be paid by public dollars, right?
So these would cost more.
So the lower the line, the more the public subsidy would have to be. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we're happy with that figure now? Yes.
And is the RAND's, is 10% the mat, you know, I mean, we've got 30% for your income or for your housing. And that's your mortgage taxes, all right. No, I guess it's 36, you add 6% on that for taxes, so you've got that. Is 10% a magic number, that's what?
So if
It's
I-
figured an average family can still feed themselves.
If I remember, there's an appendix in the report. Nolan can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there's an appendix that talks about how 10% came to be.
Also in the legislation,
Also in the list.
specifically in the legislation.
And where
Well,
did
the
7%?
But not.
Right, the 10% was in the legislation, not the justification for it, right?
Yes.
Yes, and the 7%, which one was?
We go with 7% because that was one of the bills, federal
Building
bills.
back better.
Yeah, Build Back Better with 7, so we were thinking that we want to have both of them
Build back
when
better.
it was still alive.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 5 subsidy schedules. So you sort of need to choose one of those or some variation of those in order to know what the family contribution will be. And then the public dollars have to fill the gap. Okay. All right, now we're on to, okay, so scenario 2, total family contributions would be about $260 million. And that's with capping the costs at 10% of income for families up to 3.5 times poverty. And we saw in the figure that no family with income less than 1.5 times poverty pays anything, right? That's baked into the scenario. Families with income above 3.5 times poverty would pay full cost. That's the benefit cliff we talked about. So let's see. RAND assumed no family above 5 times poverty would get any subsidy, so they can sort of set that family contribution at 162 million for all the scenarios. And then in this scenario, families with income under 5 times poverty would pay $100 million. So you can see, you can add up the family contribution, which here is about 260 million. RAND assumed that you maintain the current state and federal funding of about 125 million, and you come out with a funding gap of 258 million. Okay, so that's a lot of money. In scenario 5, remember that was the lower line at capping at 7% at 3.5 times poverty. Families would contribute about $20 million less. That's the difference in their contribution, and then that means that public money has to fill in that gap.
And it's somewhere in between for scenario 4.
I'm sorry?
Scenario 4 was,
Scenario 4 was the one that only goes up to 3.5. Yeah, so that's one of the less expensive ones.
but what's the,
It's like 192 million or something like that.
I was just trying to compare it to the 20 million.
Yeah, so the big difference is whether you go up to 350% or 500%.
Okay, and 4,
Oh, you want to stay there?
no, 4 goes up to the 350.
10% at 350, but then it goes up to 15% at 500. So it keeps going. It does extend the subsidy.
Okay.
And is that reflected on the next page in the price tag? That
So I think I have it on the. Okay.
You compare scenario 2 to 5, but not 2 to 4.
Right, the report certainly has all of those costs. And I have dog-eared pages, so we're gonna have to find it quite fast. Yes, okay. So, Schedule 2. 10% of page 49. So Schedule 2 up to 3.5 times poverty only is 180 million. Oh, but you know what, this is in 2019 dollars,
Oh,
and we asked them to translate everything to 2022 dollars, please.
yeah.
So
Maybe
their
that's what they're
final,
gonna tell us.
yeah, it's a little bit hard to bounce back and forth, but, yeah. So these would all be a bit different, but okay. So, and then Schedule 4, going up to the 15% goes up to $269 million. So it's quite a big difference between 2 stopping at 3.5 and 4 and going all the way up to 500%. All right, moving on. Okay, so here I was going to show you the poverty guidelines, but you have those in front of you already. But I did want to make the point of the benefits cliff. So if you look at scenario 2, the 3-person family can have an income up to $80,600, and they would pay 10% of their income, according to scenario 2. So that means that they would pay about $8,000
Per child.
for childcare.
But that's if they have 1, 2, or 3 kids in childcare.
Well, it's a family of 3,
Yeah,
So
so
they
they
can
can't, that's.
they
what
could have 1 or 2 kids.
They have 1 or 2,
Hope they have an
but
adult.
it's the 8,000. Okay,
Yes,
we'll get some pushback on that, I'm sure.
yes. Okay, but if they earn $81,000, so they're just over the 350% cap, they would pay the actual cost of care. Now, I'm using here the $36,000 for infant care. Going forward, we don't know if that would be the amount charged for infants. They could still cross-subsidize and charge a lower price for infants. But if they did charge that $36,000, it would mean that that family of 3 with income of $81,000 would be expected to pay 44% of their income for childcare, which is.
I would love to see that same scenario at 500%,
Oh, sure.
where it's not as dramatic, but it's still
Yep.
not great.
That's enough to discourage you from working.
Yeah. At either level, honestly, it's probably.
I mean, when you figure that kids get sick and can't go to childcare, you're going to have to take a certain number of days off. Schools childcares get closed,
No
it's
days.
snowing,
Yes.
the staff gets sick,
Mhm.
they are petri dishes. So there's gonna be some lost revenue to you. Yeah.
Yes, okay, so now we're getting to the part that you really need to think about, and that is, what are those feasible, stable, and sustainable sources of public revenue that would provide $180 to $280 million a year? So, the RAND report, thank you very much, chose to show 6 different options. 4 of them are single source options for revenue. So they are only looking at one kind of tax each. And options 5 and 6 are bundles. So they use 3 or 4 different tax types in order to come up to the full amount of revenue needed. And then after RAND has those needed revenues in hand, they run their macro model and they show the effects on the Vermont economy over a 5-year time horizon. And then you can look at things like state net revenues, economic output, change in labor force, all of those things. So we are going to focus today on what are those stable sources of revenue. So let's first look at the single source options 1 through 4. Option 1 is a new payroll tax. You've heard this before because everybody likes the payroll tax.
Except the employers.
Well, I don't think employees like it either, but here we are.
Probably not.
Right.
Not if they're not using childcare.
Right, except that it's a social investment. Okay, but here we are. Okay, so one very important point is that the RAND modelers had to assume that the tax base for the payroll tax was total compensation. And in no country that I know about is a payroll tax levied on total compensation, including fringe benefits, right? The payroll tax is generally levied on wages only.
Also, they figured your health insurance, so that's inflated by 26%
Yes,
for
for some workers, not for
some
all.
work.
Yes,
But that, I mean, that's the standard.
yes.
All
So,
right, so we're not gonna get that much money.
well, or you're gonna raise the payroll tax above what they
Yes.
suggest. Yes. Yes, and my translation, if I go from total compensation to the wage base only, and I'm stopping the wage base at the Social Security taxable maximum, because that's generally how we impose payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, blah, blah, not Medicare. I take that back, Social Security, yes. So if you make that translation, it means instead of a 0.9% rate, it means a 1.1 to 1.2% payroll tax rate. So that's an important point, and they did not make that clear in the report, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think,
No,
I
that,
think people need to be.
I've always heard 1%. What is the present payroll tax?
So I'm going to test my Social Security knowledge. So right now, let's see.
Is it just Social Security? Is there a state?
Well, there's a Medicare
Yeah.
payroll tax. There's no state payroll tax at the moment.
Okay, so this would be the first state payroll tax.
So that's a line of questioning I'd love to explore. If we don't currently have that, what are the concerns about the tax office about doing so? But we do have employer taxes. Do you have maybe a question for Emily to come back to? I'd love to know what employer taxes we have.
Okay.
Like the unemployment insurance and the other ones, and how those compare to a payroll tax. I think that'd be a useful discussion to have.
Yeah, I think we're looking for what are employers presently paying?
Uh-huh.
And,
The capability to do it.
yeah, and if an employer is paying for healthcare,
Not considered a tax, but
not considered a tax, but it's a cost. If they say, okay, if I've got to pay for your childcare, I'm not paying.
maybe they cut back on health
Maybe
insurance.
those cutbacks, I mean, those are things we may not, this is done in a vacuum.
Well, I mean, eventually they put it all into their model and everything's happening at once, right? But when we think about it, we all often think about the single new payroll tax. Yes, and at this point, I should give the little economist speech, which says that whether you levy the payroll tax on the employer or the employee, in theory, it shouldn't matter because it all comes out of total compensation. What is an employer willing to pay for the value of someone's services, right? And so that employer has to think about what's the total cost that I'm paying, total compensation for this worker. And it would include payroll tax, health insurance, time off, wages, of course, their share of the Social Security tax, all those things go into total compensation.
Great in theory, so at the macro
Yes.
level, but at the practical level and implementation, there is a lot of different political implications and
absolutely.
feasibility.
Absolutely. That was the second part.
Okay, cheers.
My first reaction is on this stakeholders committee, and the first thing I heard was this presentation on taxes, and I'm saying, not in Vermont. I mean, it was nice in theory, but the actual, because at one point, a service on medical charges, medical services, and I'm saying, no, I don't think so.
Except that we already have fees on medical services.
We do. I mean, but to do that, some things are just easier to do than others. And yes, and not all employers are the same.
But
People just don't.
Yeah, payroll tax that would effectively lower people's take-home salaries if we put it in place. But an employer tax, I'm not saying I'm advocating for this to the YouTube audience. That would be put on the employers, but the employers aren't going to lower I would not expect the employers to then the next year lower everybody's salary effectively or to charge those fees onto the payrolls. It's going to be something that's going to vary by employer and how that affects over time phasing in. But
Perhaps, I would say there's likely to be a smaller increase in wages the next year. Or
Yes,
there's
that
likely to
would be
less
my-
benefits
yeah.
next year, whatever. It has to come from somewhere, right? It's not thin profit margins.
Bonuses have been mentioned.
Agreed.
There are employers that give bonuses if they have, and right now, none of their employees need childcare. It's an older workforce. So if they have to pay the payroll tax, they might not be able to give the, I mean, we're gonna hear all of this, the chamber.
It's called prices.
Yes, it's called the market.
Yeah.
Typically, if you have a 1% increase in wages, it is a good excuse to raise prices by 2 or 3%.
Well, yeah. We're seeing that. Or you can make the box smaller.
Just two things I want to flag or ask questions about, and one might relate to the other. It would be great to know if there are other states that have a childcare payroll tax. I want to think of Minnesota or something, I don't know. Or use these mix of taxes. And then two, I just want to flag that I imagine one consideration that's shared between this committee and economic development is if a business is providing childcare. We have heard from a few of those and just want to flag that as like, I think they want to see some value for doing that themselves.
I think most of them, an awful lot of closed. I know 2 major employers around here who started and have just started off on their own.
Right.
Because of the cost.
there's a company in, no, not in our district, but it's known for ages, Vermont Information Processing. They've always dedicated a space in their building for childcare, and it's been one of the biggest draws for many people to work there. I would hate for them to pay a childcare employer tax while also continuing to provide this, because they're going to be put in a predicament where maybe they need to rent that space out and no longer provide on-site childcare. So some sort of caveat or way to qualify to avoid having to pay the childcare payroll tax if they already have childcare provided through some standardized means is what you're getting at, correct?
It is, although, we want to, I think there's a difference between providing space and paying for the,
Sure.
paying, so it's complicated, it might be shared
There's
committee.
that
I
whole
don't know.
maximum,
Yeah.
the minute you try and get there, it gets complicated.
Right. But I think, and to your, the testimony I heard, I feel like left me feeling like there's an intangible benefit of having your child on site, if at all possible, and we wouldn't want to penalize that out of existence. So I absolutely agree on that point.
So.
I would just add that borrowing from work in paid family leave, if an employer has an equivalent or better program, they can opt out of the paid family leave program. So that might be something similar here.
Okay.
Okay.
If I could crystallize that, I just agree. My wife, we're a 2-income household, and she only went back to work. She wanted to because she found childcare walking distance from her school. So I would hate to disincentivize on-premise corporate provided spaces, because I think that's a huge draw for those with young children.
Yeah, it is. You can go down when they get upset or have a tummy ache.
Yes, okay, so that's the payroll tax. Then we move to option 2, which is to increase the sales and use tax. And as you know, right now it's 6% in Vermont, and this would increase it quite a bit about that. Okay, option 3 would establish a new limited service tax on personal services and entertainment. And what do they mean by personal services? They mean things like auto mechanics and household repairs and dry cleaning and all those sort of household personal services, haircuts, whatever. So there would be a new service tax there. And also on entertainment, which includes performing art, museums, fitness centers, bowling alleys, all of those fun things, okay?
Do they currently have no tax?
They currently have no tax on services.
A state by state.
Entertainment, I meant.
Yeah,
I need
again,
the
it
service.
would be helpful to.
Right.
I mean, logically, that's where the money is going. It used to be in property, then it was on what you bought.
Right.
Now it's on the service sector is where the money is growing.
Yeah, and I always remember that conversation, which I agree we should explore, but I didn't know entertainment. Like if you go to a movie, there's no tax.
I'm not aware of tax.
These are new things to me after here some ways in me.
Now, there was something, what, during the time that the tax auditors went out, there was some deal with the Flynn, but it had to do with the entertainers and their equipment and whether or not they provided their own. We'll talk to the tax, but the Flynn was getting hit with a big bill because if they provided it, it was tax exempt, or if the crew, the performance brought their own. There's something there.
Okay.
But if I were gonna tax something, I think I'd start with manicures before bowling alleys. Just,
I don't know, that seems a little.
my daughter would not
Close
speak to me, but it's just who it's hitting.
But I don't wanna create a pink tax, right? Like,
Guys get pedicures.
well, not the same rate. I don't know why we would tax manicures.
I start with
Well,
the services you have to.
yeah,
Right.
Haircuts, I don't know if I want to tax haircuts.
well, that's what's
Yeah.
always come up. You're gonna tax my haircut. And so how do you,
You don't have to bowl.
no, you
Right.
don't have to, but people that bowl, I mean, want to try Thunder Road, let's tax mask. Go to see it get beat up.
The bowling lobbies are coming.
But then you also have the performing arts people who say don't
We
tax, so you
have,
start
well,
to.
there's
pick and
the
choose.
internet now, online gambling is not.
Oh.
It's
That
here,
might be an option 4.
okay, because that's one that is being looked at.
So option 4 would put a new extended service tax on broadcasting and publishing in addition to the previous limited service tax.
We don't have much in publishing, and I'm sure not gonna tax Big Bird again. They cut BPR during the 90s, and Big Bird was on saying, kids, tell your parents not to cut Sesame Street. Susan Bartlett says she's never cutting it, never going up against Big Bird again. The only thing worse was when there was word that we were going to tax satellite
Oh my gosh,
TV.
yeah, I know.
And there was just this thing that ran under every TV
Right.
show, call your legislator, there's
Yeah.
going to tax Dr. Phil. And yeah, and we got a lot of calls, and we weren't taxing them.
I don't see streaming services, which I feel like would be a huge divide. If we can't tax Hulu and Netflix, et cetera, then this just feels pretty unfair.
So broadcasting includes telecommunication services, internet publishing, so it very likely falls in that.
It
bucket.
does it?
Kindle Books always has a sales tax.
Pardon me?
Books already have a sales tax when I'm,
Do they?
oh, well, when I buy it from Kindle now, it's coming through Amazon and I pay a sales
All right.
tax. If I buy a book, if I listen to the local Green Mountain Libby, the online library service, I can download a book, read it, and send it back. I can listen to a book and send it back. There's no fee and there's no tax.
Is this a streamlined definition of what counts as?
So I should have mentioned at the start of this slide that the RAND group did work with Graham Campbell back when he was still with us. We miss him
Is
still.
he in New Zealand yet?
Not yet. I think March, maybe.
Close. He's made it to Australia.
Well, the new baby was born.
Yes, I know that. Now they're waiting for the baby to get documented.
And yes, the visa, yes. Okay, so the RAND group did work with Graham and straightened out some of the streamlined tax agreement stuff.
Because the 15% soda tax is not a sales tax that they have. That's the Philadelphia, and it's gotta be an excise tax.
Oh, is that right?
Well, we're limited to 6%. And they've got, what, 23 million for soft drinks tax?
Okay, I will bring that up with the revenue team.
And they said it was the Philadelphia model, and it would, as far as I know, they're the only ones that have done it, and it can't, I mean, streamlined sales tax, we can't have different sales
Right,
tax on
right.
different items.
Okay,
6%, tax it or not.
all right. So we're now on slide 11, looking at options 5 and 6 that are those bundles, and both the bundles include the soda tax of 15%, but we'll check that out. And also the hospitality tax, which would increase the meals tax from 9% to 10%.
Just meals.
I believe it's just meals.
It would be weird to call it a hospitality tax if it's just meals, but
So I will.
Not really.
They call that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying, we were right in the middle of the pack. If we increased rooms, that would be hitting the hotel, motel.
Right.
The ski industry, the hospitality industry, who's had a couple of really bad years
yeah,
where it hurts.
but restaurants have also been hit, so it's just hard for me to, I don't think we should call it a hospitality tax unless we're talking about meals, rooms, alcohol. Anything else would be not a it would be one of those.
I don't think most people connect the word hospitality with the word tax,
Right.
not in this country.
Unless they mean something else, yeah, it seems weird to call it a
Okay.
hospitality tax all of a sudden.
Well, the one figure that isn't in here is the 32 million that we've foregone. So we could repurpose that child, because the thought was this is money families could use for childcare. So the Senate tried to get it to sunset after 2 years. We lost. But we were told, well, you can always sunset. And then the concern was that we were not going to have a soft landing. We were going to have a hard landing and need that money. So the further we get along,
So you're raising a very important point. That is, we don't necessarily have to all raise all this from taxes. There's ways that we can cut spending, look at other services and programs. For example, I made a lot of concerns raised about universal meals. It's $30 million that is funding kids and families that can afford it. If there was a way to revisit that so that we could again maintain, not addressing or not giving a stigma to it, but collecting from families that have some ability to pay. There are ways that we could draw on $10 to $20 million from families that have to pay while still taking the cash register out of the cafeteria. There are ways to have universal meals while still collecting from those that can. And that could raise $10 to $20 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just go in, you show your card.
So I'm not opposed. I think that'd be healthy for us.
I'd be upstairs, who knows, I mean, maybe somebody's paying my lunch bill. I just have a number, I give you my number. It's either it's on my account or I'm going free, but nobody knows. Yeah, I just give you a number and say, this is what I've done for lunch. I don't know why in this day and age, there would probably be some startup costs. Maybe we could find some ESSER money to do that. Or yeah, swipe cards, kids would lose them. So it'd be just easier, you give me your 4 digits of your phone number.
I welcome other suggestions on where we could cut spending in ways to reduce tax increases.
Of course, that's going in, that's sales tax, that's ed fund. But there's a legitimate reason to use ed fund, and there was some talk about 4-year-olds going in to pre-K and including them in,
There's a new bill out today.
oh,
I also, in transportation, have already stated that I fully support a fee bill, which would actually generate a very reasonable way, $12 to $20 million, depending on how you do it. That would be $12 to $20 million that could be used for this, because that I think is a rational way to collect for transportation activities. I just think there's other ways. I welcome suggestions on spending areas that we could focus on in order to pay for some of these things, while also looking at what this is and where we can cut it back.
trust me, we know how to rob Peter to pay.
Okay, very good.
Just want to make sure we don't cut something else. But I think, yeah, I mean, I just figured we were paying for school lunch because you just don't stop feeding kids. But I was told, well, yesterday in caucus that we were supposed to see a whole lot more kids income eligible. Well, that's not showing up. But there seem to be less kids that, anyway, we're still at about the same price, plus or minus a couple. $100,000. Yeah, you know, so yes, if we took some money out, that could, or maybe that would go if we pulled 4-year-olds out of this formula and put them in the school budget, then that, well, that wouldn't help the $36,000 a year for income.
My hunger-free Vermont friends, I'm not saying that we're gonna stop feeding kids. What I'm suggesting is that we find ways to collect from the families that
Well,
can pay, or
We
maybe
also want to give parents ability to stay home and take care of kids or parents. We want to have childcare that families can afford and that allows them to work. But there's a cost. And I keep saying it, but other countries pay a 50% income tax. And that is just not acceptable in this country. And so we are trying to provide a lot of the same services by squishing around the edges and gerrymandering or rigging or whatever we're doing. So this is our puzzle piece and we can put them together. But yeah, the 15% of the soft drinks,
It's never the best of it.
yeah, we could do 6% and maybe cut that in half and only get 12 million. And then we've had the candy tax in here before. I'm sure Senator Perchlik would be happy to dust it off and send it in. Again, if it has flour or dairy products, it's not candy, right? I'm sure Jim Harrison would be love to come in, even though he's no longer the grocer's lobbyist, and do his little brown bag that he brings in. Okay, what do you think? Is this taxable or is that? And there are some mom and pop stores. I mean, Walmart gets their thing set in Alabama, Arkansas, you know, and that's, their computers are set there. But mom and pop stores, it is an issue when you've got a couple of 16-year-olds working in there. It gets to be a judgment call sometimes. And we punish them if they make the wrong call, so. It is an issue. There's also alcohol.
Tobacco more?
We haven't paid, the one tax you can raise and everybody loves you is tobacco.
I have never just blanketly supported tobacco tax increases because it really does just feel like a continued tax on the poor.
It is.
And the easiest thing
It's a
to
tax on-
continue to go back
it's
to
a tax
when we
on
need
addiction.
money. Yeah,
People are addicted and it's a tax on addiction.
it drove Janet crazy, but I would never support it.
Yeah, no, it's never been my favorite place.
Also, sin taxes puts the government in the sin business.
Well, yeah,
We're dependent, we
Right.
become dependent on these various.
that's it, which we should be doing away with, which is why every governor I've worked under has opposed gambling. We have no casinos. Just, I guess we had the final refuge of Yankee stoicism, but we were not going to run government services on sins. It just was not appropriate. But everybody else is doing it, and
I should.
we're there now.
What I was gonna start to, speaking of all these little grabs for money, $4 million at the end of session becomes so important, and I'm struggling with going forward. It seems to me we should stop using 2022 dollars, and I don't know if the 196 million is that rand estimate that isn't real.
It is 2022.
Is
These
it-
are all 2022.
But is the 196 million also that issue you pointed out?
Yes,
that it's
yes,
taxed?
that's the problem. So that
Okay,
1%, that
Okay,
1% is probably closer to 1.2, 1.3%.
so the amount wouldn't change, but we'd have to,
Rates would have to go up.
or we'd have to look at what 1% yields, which is not 196 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so I imagine JFO at some point is gonna be able to true all this up, so we're looking at 2023 dollars, and I don't know, like how that works.
Give us an inflation rate.
Oh, that.
Do we have to give you, do we?
No, I'm joking. I know.
Oh, okay.
That's what we need to move
Okay.
the money to
Yeah, it's-
Google something.
and that's still going up.
Right.
Seemed to settle for a while.
Rate is coming down.
Gas is going up again.
So are we gonna choose explicitly to use 2022 dollars until we know what 2023's?
Well, for now, I think we have the report that is in its final numbers giving us $2022.
Okay.
So that would be the easy thing to do right now, is to use $2022. If we get closer to the end of session and people want everything inflated to 2023, we can do that.
But by the time we get it into practice, it's gonna be $24.
Oh, sure.
And I mean, these are all estimates.
Absolutely.
We may see a lot of people flock to work, or we might not. We might see people move into the state, but we don't have housing for them, so we might not.
Right.
Um,
And when I look at a payroll tax, I'm wondering, we're talking about at least 9,000 literal open jobs, 24,000, like supposed open jobs, somewhere in that range. There's no tax collected just for an open job.
Right.
So unless people are at work, we're estimating based on the current number of people in jobs right now.
So my estimates come from the tax department, and they're looking at W-2 forms, so
Okay.
actual earnings from 2021, and we have inflated them to 2022.
Okay, so it'd be nice if we filled more jobs in the state.
Well, then, yes, that's always, if we get more jobs, then we will make more money. Well, we're working on that.
Yes.
We're working on everything. I'm going to start to lose at least one member at 4:30. My 4:30 is canceled. But are you?
I'm very close. So
Okay.
this is the baseline estimates of potential revenue, and these are the numbers that Grant Campbell actually looked at and talked with Rand about. So aside from the payroll tax, these are definitely in the ballpark. Okay, so that's just a reference for you to have. And then when you get down to the actual funding of the gaps, Rand is suggesting that a 0.9% payroll tax or a 2 percentage point increase in the sales tax, or a new limited service tax of 9.9%, or a new expanded services tax of 7.1%, would all generate revenue of about 190 million. So that would be up to 3.5 times poverty, right? Not beyond to 500% more.
The answer's gonna be a single one, it's gonna be a smorgasbord.
Exactly, which is why they say that bundling sources together can lower the increases in any one tax source, which,
Raising the sales tax.
And you can cut spending,
And raising the sales
cut
tax,
spending.
we've got New Hampshire. I don't know that Rand understands the
Oh, they
New
do.
Hampshire.
actually, Lynn Carroll's family's from Norwich. so
Okay,
She
she
understands.
understands New Hampshire. The sales tax, when we looked, when the original Blue Tax Commission study, Blue Ribbon came in, they recommended going to a service tax and lowering the rate, which would lower. But you got into, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I work in New Hampshire and I work in Vermont, and that it didn't find legs, but that, yeah, the House spent a lot of time trying to collapse those top two tax brackets because their commission was make us more competitive. And that top marginal tax rate was hanging out there, despite the fact that it was only on that portion of your income in that upper bracket. But we never spent a lot of time on moving to services. And maybe not, I mean, one governor said tax lawyers. But we could look at some services. I go and I buy a topographical map for my kid for school, and I pay a sales tax. I hire a surveyor to produce a topographical map. I pay a lot more and I pay no sales tax or excise tax or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I remember from the Blue Ribbon Commission that looked at revenue neutral service taxes was this philosophy that it's not fair to keep putting it on the sales tax for goods because a lawnmower versus a landscaper, we're in a different world now. So if we were choosing between a sales tax or a services tax, I would lean in the direction of a services tax too, because it's kind of unfair to keep increasing the sales tax, which is regressive.
It's where the money is.
I agree.
Okay,
You're going, all right.
Becomes more problematic for each year we're unwilling to address it. I think
Right.
now maybe becomes more and more service.
Yeah.
It does. I think we're in a position where we're gonna alienate everyone.
Yeah, I know, someone's just heard us and had a heart attack.
so it's very last slide.
Last slide. Oh,
Last
it's
slide.
Mr. Brent to wake
Very
us up.
thoughtful, yes. So this is Rand's attempt to say what's a progressive tax and what's a regressive tax. And the green means it's easier for the household to bear the tax, and the red orange means it's harder for those households because it's a bigger share of their income. So the one column that I haven't been able to explain to myself is the payroll tax. They are claiming that households with income less than 15,000 don't have much earnings. And in fact, most of their, or a very good chunk of their earning, of their income comes from transfer payments, not earnings. So they would not bear a very big share.
Okay,
of
so
the
these are
payroll
the folks that are getting, well, they're probably on reach up.
Yeah.
Less than 15,000.
The EIS.
EICT, yeah, those, and it'll be interesting to take the EICT numbers we heard last week from Patrick and overlay them with that. There is that large group that is there for 7, 8, 9 years, and they continually to get EITC. They don't move off. And would this impact them?
Not if they don't have earnings. They would not be paying payroll tax if they don't
Well,
have
they've
earnings.
got some earnings.
They must in order to
Yeah.
get the EITC, right?
Yeah, they're
Right.
working.
But it may be a smaller
Yeah.
percentage of their overall income, right?
So but again, limited service tax is definitely gonna hit the wealthier,
Higher income, yeah.
yeah, the higher incomes. All right,
Yes, so this is sort of an interesting way to think about who bears the burden of the tax.
okay,
Good, well, thank you very much.
thank you. Simple solutions.
And I will certainly pass along questions to Emily and the revenue team.
Yeah, see if we can figure out if we just put a sales tax on soft drinks,
The 6%, yeah.
get the 6%.
Yeah.
And sugar, I'm sure we have estimated, including maple sugar. That's what little it before.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was like, oh gosh, we're like going there.
I'm sorry, but maple syrup is a,
Suggesting that we tax maple syrup and perhaps milk.
well, that's, yeah, that's what's,
I think diapers. While you're at it.
I don't know if they can pick up the sarcasm on YouTube.
I know, I'm not saying it over.
okay, this is what's known as the committee needs to vent, because we have been told we have a very gnarly problem to solve. And with that, we're gonna open the door, we're gonna go on.